Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. It was raining the night I asked him again, just once more, if I could visit the country house. Daniel's face barely moved, but his hand clenched around his glass, knuckles pale. No, he said, sharp and sudden, as if the question itself had insulted him. I stood frozen by the window, watching our reflections flicker in the glass, unsure what I'd touched that made him go cold. All I knew was that something in his voice didn't sound like protection. It sounded like fear. He always said the country house was just a quiet place for work, nothing special, nothing to see. But each time I asked, his answer grew colder, his eyes darker, as if the subject itself was poison. We had no fights, no screaming, only walls of silence built one word at a time. I stopped asking, stopped wondering aloud, but deep inside, the silence began to feel heavier than any truth. It wasn't peace between us. It was distance disguised as calm. I convinced myself that love meant trusting without knowing, without pressing. I told myself that if Daniel had secrets, they were his to carry and mine to respect. I called it loyalty, but deep down it was fear that if I pulled the thread, everything might unravel. So I smiled, nodded, and stayed in the light he allowed me to see. But love without answers is just devotion in the dark. He said he needed to spend the weekend at the country house alone to clear his head. I kissed him goodbye at the door, not knowing it would be the last time. That night, around 2 a.m., I got the call, the kind that makes your body go numb before your mind can understand. His car had flipped off the icy road on his way back. The paramedics said he died instantly. Just like that, the secrets he guarded died with him, or so I thought. 7 days later, when the shock still sat heavy on my chest, I got a call from a man named Harlan. He introduced himself as Daniel's lawyer, his voice formal but laced with something colder. "There are matters we need to discuss in person," he said, offering no detail. I agreed, unsure what could possibly be left to say. Death tends to end most conversations. But this meeting would open a door I never knew existed. Mr. Harlan's office was as stiff as his suit. Mahogany shelves, no family photos, just the law. He didn't look at me when he opened the file, just cleared his throat and said, "Mrs. Carter, your husband left you the country property. It's now yours." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The house he never let me near, now mine? I couldn't tell if it was a cruel joke or his final confession. He slid an envelope and a ring of iron keys across the desk without meeting my eyes. The envelope was sealed in wax, thick and yellowed, like it had waited years for this moment. The keys clanked against the wood, old and heavy, their teeth worn with time. My fingers trembled as I picked them up, sensing they belonged to a place frozen in secrets. Harlan simply said, "Everything you find there is yours to keep or destroy." I should have walked away, burned the keys, shredded the letter, buried whatever waited in that house. But something inside me, anger, grief, or something far older, refused to rest. I needed to see it. I needed to know what had lived in the dark while I waited patiently in the light. So I packed a bag, took the keys, and followed the shadow he left behind. The road stretched endlessly, winding through forests that seemed to hold their breath. Clouds pressed low against the earth, heavy and gray, swallowing every trace of color. I drove in silence, Daniel's name echoing in my mind like a ghost without a face. Each mile I passed felt like peeling back a layer of skin, closer to something raw, something real. By the time I saw the gate, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. It stood tall, wrapped in vines, the metal rusted and split from age, but the lock clicked open with one twist. As I pushed it forward, the hinges screamed, long and aching, like something waking from a long, bitter sleep. The path beyond was swallowed in shadows, the gravel overrun by moss and time. The air shifted, colder, heavier, as if I'd crossed into another world. And still I kept walking, heart pounding, breath shallow, eyes locked on what waited ahead. Through the trees it emerged, tall and still, draped in ivy, windows dark like watching eyes. It was beautiful but wrong, like a painting where something's missing but you don't know what. The porch sagged slightly, the shutters clung to rusted hinges, but the bones of the place were proud. It didn't look abandoned, it looked hidden, like it had been waiting for someone to remember. My hands tightened around the keys. This was it. His secret life began here. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the silence thickened. Not peaceful but watchful, like the land itself was holding its breath. Even the wind, which had followed me all morning, stopped short at the door, unwilling to cross that threshold. No birds, no creaks, no distant hum of life. Just a silence so deep it rang in my ears. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something hidden. My skin prickled and still I reached for the key. The lock resisted, then gave with a sigh, and I pushed the door open into warm, stale air that wrapped around me like a breath held too long. The wood groaned under my feet as I stepped inside, heart pounding, pulse drumming in my throat. The scent was old books, dust, and something faintly sweet, too faint to place, too familiar to ignore. Light slashed through the windows in narrow blades, catching motes of dust that danced like memories. The door clicked shut behind me and I was alone. On the small dining table, not far from the entrance, a candle burned fresh, tall, its flame calm and steady. I froze, staring, my mind rejecting what my eyes couldn't deny. Someone had lit it recently. No dust on the wax, no pooling at the base, just clean living flame. This house was supposed to be abandoned, untouched, sealed in silence. But that single candle whispered, "You are not the first to enter." I stood perfectly still, every sense sharpened to the point of pain. The warmth in the air wasn't just from the candle. The whole house held the heat of someone living in it. I glanced around and saw a coat slung over the chair, a scarf draped on the banister, a faint indent on the couch cushion. These weren't traces of the past. They were signs of the present. This place was not empty. Someone was still here. Then soft, deliberate, I heard it. A creak on the floor above, too slow to be the house settling, too light to be ignored. My breath caught, every muscle frozen, listening. Another step, then silence again, as if someone had paused, listening for me too. My heart slammed against my ribs, louder than my own thoughts. I wasn't imagining this. Someone was up there and they knew I had arrived. "Hello." My voice cracked the stillness like a stone through glass, sharp and loud in the quiet. No answer came. Just that same waiting silence pressing back against me. I took a shaky step toward the stairs, unsure whether I wanted a reply or feared one. The candle flickered behind me, but I didn't turn, my eyes fixed on the floor above. Is someone here? I tried again. Nothing. But the air felt like it was holding its breath. I moved slowly into the living room, drawn to the mantel by something I couldn't name. A pull deeper than curiosity. And there, above the cold ashes, a single photo sat in a silver frame, untouched by dust. I stepped closer and my stomach dropped. It was Daniel, smiling gently, cradling a baby in his arms. My hands began to shake before I even registered the second face. The woman beside him. She was young, maybe late 20s, her arm wrapped around Daniel like they'd done it 100 times. Her eyes were bright, her smile soft, her presence unmistakably real. They looked like a family, complete, casual, deeply familiar in the way only truth can be. I had never seen her before, not once, not even in passing. And yet she stood beside my husband as if I'd never existed. I backed away from the mantel, dizzy, and nearly stumbled over something soft. I looked down and saw a small plush rabbit, its ears chewed, resting on a colorful rug littered with toys. Beside it, a vase of fresh lilies sat on the side table, their scent finally registering, that faint sweetness in the air. A kettle on the stove still steamed, whispering that someone had just been here. This was not a memory. This was a home. My instincts screamed to run, to get out while I still could, while the ground beneath my life hadn't fully collapsed. But something stronger, maybe grief, maybe rage, nailed me to the floor. I had to know who she was, why she was here, why my husband had built a life in the shadows. My fingers dug into my palms, grounding me in the storm inside my chest. I wouldn't leave, not yet. Not until I saw the truth for myself. Then I heard it, soft, melodic, and unmistakably human. A lullaby, barely a whisper, drifting down the staircase like a thread pulling me upward. The melody was gentle, almost soothing, but in that house it felt like a scream. I moved toward the sound, each step louder than the one before, heart thudding like it wanted to turn back. But I couldn't stop now. Someone was singing to a child in my husband's secret life. At the top of the stairs, I followed the voice to a room with its door cracked open, a line of warm light spilling across the hallway floor. The lullaby had stopped, replaced by the rustle of movement, a chair creaking, a baby's soft sigh. My hand hovered near the door, fingers trembling as I pushed it just enough to see. My breath caught, my body rooted in place as the truth stepped into view. There she was, not a ghost, not a memory, but real and alive. A young woman sat in a rocking chair, her back turned, cradling a baby in her arms, humming to him in low, soothing tones. As the door creaked, she turned, startled, and her eyes locked with mine in pure confusion and fear. The baby stirred against her chest, oblivious to the storm brewing in the doorway. She stood quickly, protectively, eyes wide with questions she couldn't form fast enough. And before I could stop myself, the words burst out. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice sharp and high, cutting through the quiet. "Who are you?" she shot back, stepping between me and the child like I was the intruder. For a second we just stared, two strangers standing in the center of a lie. Her breathing was heavy, her hands white-knuckled around the baby, and I realized mine were shaking too. We both thought we had the right to be there. "I'm Claire," she said, almost daring me to challenge her. "Daniel's wife." The room spun, the floor shifted, and I felt something inside me break in silence. I stared at her, unable to speak, unable to breathe, as if the truth had knocked the air out of my lungs. "That's impossible," I said finally, barely a whisper. "I'm his wife." My knees nearly gave out, and I reached for the doorframe as the world tilted around me. Claire's expression shifted, from fear to confusion to horror, the layers peeling away fast. "What are you talking about?" she asked, holding the baby tighter. I didn't answer, couldn't, because everything I knew had just shattered like glass at my feet. My marriage wasn't just broken, it was duplicated. Claire grabbed a folder from the nearby dresser with trembling hands, pulled out a piece of paper, and shoved it toward me. A marriage certificate, real, legal, dated 2 years after mine, signed in his familiar handwriting. I read it again and again, my brain refusing to believe what my eyes couldn't deny. "He married me in Boston," she said. "We met at a conference. I didn't know about you." I believed her, that was the worst part. Daniel hadn't just lied. He had split himself in two. 2 homes, 2 marriages, 2 sets of promises wrapped in the same voice, the same eyes. My mind reeled, trying to retrace the years, the birthdays he missed, the business trips, the months that never quite made sense. Every late return, every unexplained silence, every time I told myself to trust, it had all been part of the performance. He hadn't been one man living a lie. He had been 2. Claire's face crumpled as realization hit her in waves. "I thought you were his ex," she said slowly, the baby starting to cry in her arms. "He told me you'd left him, that you couldn't handle his work, that you were unstable." Her voice cracked at the word, and I saw the betrayal bloom in her chest. "He said you kept calling him, showing up, refusing to let go." I felt sick. He had made me the ghost in her life. The child's cry swelled, sharp and insistent, and Claire turned away from me to rock him gently, whispering words he couldn't understand. The sound cut through the room like a blade, anchoring us both to the reality we didn't ask for. I watched the baby's face, his small fingers, his eyes, his perfect innocence, and I hated Daniel for dragging him into this. Claire met my gaze again, softer now, the fire dimmed. In that moment, the lie wasn't between us. It had wrapped around us both. We sat in silence, broken women in a house built on lies, the baby's soft breathing the only steady sound. My hands trembled as I stared at the floor, unable to look at her, afraid I'd see myself reflected. We both loved the same liar, I whispered, more to the room than to her. Claire let out a breath that wasn't quite a sob, but close, like grief in disguise. That was the moment we stopped being enemies. I stood, needing to move, to do anything but feel, and my eyes landed on Daniel's old desk in the corner. Something about it felt off, too clean, too out of place in the dusty room. I ran my hand along the back panel and felt it shift slightly, a dull thud beneath the wood. I pressed, and the wall gave way to a square dent. A hidden safe, buried where no one would notice. Claire came to my side without a word as I reached for the keys. The lock clicked open, and inside was a nightmare disguised as order. 2 passports, one in each of our names, but neither with our real wedding dates. Stacks of cash bound tight with rubber bands sat beside 2 wedding rings, not ours but replicas. Claire gasped as I pulled out a stack of black and white photos, each one featuring Daniel with a different woman. My stomach turned. The lies hadn't started with us, and they hadn't ended either. Tucked beneath the cash were 2 thick envelopes, one with my name, one with Claire's, both written in Daniel's precise, familiar handwriting. I opened mine with shaking hands, hoping for closure but fearing more deceit. Inside were pages of promises, declarations of love, dreams he'd written down like vows. Every sentence felt real until I remembered he'd written the same to someone else. Claire's hands were pressed to her mouth as tears slipped through her fingers. He hadn't just lied, he'd crafted a performance, a dual existence, curated with exact detail to fool us both completely. He gave us the same dreams, the same compliments, even the same pet names. Love copied and pasted between lives. My stomach twisted with nausea as the pattern emerged. So precise it felt calculated. He didn't trip into a double life, he built it. Claire whispered. We were never wives. We were roles. In the bottom of the safe, beneath the letters, was a small USB drive labeled in black ink. If something happens. I stared at it like it might explode, the weight of its meaning too heavy to hold. Claire and I locked eyes. No questions, just understanding. We plugged it into the old laptop Daniel had left in the study, the screen flickering to life as the file loaded. His voice filled the room a second later. Hi, he began, and just the sound of his voice made my chest ache with fury. If you're hearing this, it means I failed. I never wanted to hurt you. Either of you. He sounded nervous, less rehearsed than I expected, like the cracks were finally showing. I'm not who I said I was, but I tried to protect you both from what's coming. Claire clutched the edge of the desk. I barely breathed. He admitted everything, the aliases, the financial fraud, the shell companies across multiple states. He named offshore accounts, business partners with criminal records, and deals too dangerous to back out of. He called it a system I couldn't escape, but he'd clearly made choices, selfish, deliberate ones. Victor won't stop, he said suddenly, his voice tight. If I die, it won't be an accident. Claire's eyes snapped to mine. My blood ran cold. We tore through the bedroom after the video ended, our adrenaline louder than our fear. Behind the old wardrobe, I noticed scuff marks on the floor, a faint line on the wall that didn't match the paint. I pushed hard, and the panel creaked open, revealing a narrow, hidden staircase leading downward. Dust curled into the air like smoke from a forgotten fire. Claire grabbed a flashlight. Neither of us spoke. We descended together. The air grew colder as we stepped into the basement, the walls pressed in with damp stone and the silence of long-held secrets. Our flashlights swept across shelves lined with boxes, not of memories but of crimes. Everything down there felt like evidence waiting to be used against us. Claire walked ahead, clutching the light, her free hand reaching for mine without thinking. I didn't pull away. Fear was no longer something we faced alone. The boxes were filled with documents, fake IDs, forged contracts, lists of names and transactions written in Daniel's handwriting. Photos spilled out of one folder, showing him with other women, some smiling, some clearly unaware they were being photographed. Claire sifted through passports with different aliases, her mouth pressed in a tight line. Everything was catalogued, organized like a museum of betrayal. We weren't Daniel's only story. We were just his longest-running ones. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. He'd done this before, in at least 3 other states, maybe more. Every woman was a variation of the same lie. Different cities, same love letters, same promises. It wasn't random. He had perfected it, refined it, repeated it like a business model. Claire sat on the floor, her back against the wall, staring at nothing. I wondered how many women were still out there, thinking they were his only one. We heard the tires crunching outside before we even made it back upstairs. Claire ran to the window just as 3 police cars pulled through the gate, red and blue lights spinning silently in the gray afternoon. Mr. Harlan stepped out first, his expression tight and grim. "He told them," I whispered, realizing the lawyer must have seen the signs, found something in Daniel's files. Whatever peace we had left was about to be shattered. Detectives entered the house with quiet urgency, cordoning off rooms, snapping photos, asking questions in clipped, emotionless tones. They examined the safe, copied the files, and recorded every word we said, even the ones spoken through tears. Claire handed them the flash drive, her fingers trembling. I gave them the letters, the cash, the truth we never wanted. By nightfall, the house felt less like a home and more like a crime scene. They didn't say it outright, but the suspicion hung in every glance, every pause, as if we might have known. After all, how do 2 wives not realize they were sharing a man? How does no one notice millions missing, lives fabricated, whole identities invented? Claire tried to explain, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. I kept quiet, because nothing I said could undo the impossibility of our story. Each hour brought new revelations. Offshore accounts and stolen names, stolen identities, money tied to criminal organizations. Daniel hadn't just lied. He'd operated like a ghost in a system he built himself. He had touched things that didn't belong to him, played with power far beyond what we imagined. Claire sat with the baby clutched against her chest, whispering prayers to no one. I sat beside her, finally understanding. This nightmare had no clear ending. Late that night, a detective knocked gently on the guest room door. "We believe the crash wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "The car's brake line had been severed, not by nature but by hands." Claire let out a sound I'll never forget. Part gasp, part scream, part silence breaking in two. I felt my heart splinter again, not just for the betrayal, but for the violence that ended it. $2 million. That was the amount still missing. The last known deposit into Daniel's account before the crash. The accounts were frozen, the transfers traced, but the money itself had vanished. No withdrawal, no trail, no signs of movement. The detectives pressed us hard. Where would he have hidden that kind of cash? But we didn't know. All we had were ashes and questions. "They'll think we helped him," Claire whispered, rocking the baby in the dark. "They'll think we knew." Her fear wasn't irrational. We had access to the house, we had names on documents, we had motives we didn't choose. My mind raced with every headline that would tear us apart. I touched her shoulder, not to comfort, but to steady myself. We were standing in a storm we didn't create but might not survive. The next morning they returned with a warrant, not to ask but to take. They tore through the house like it belonged to them. Every drawer opened, every floorboard tapped, every photo scrutinized. One officer pried loose a section of the basement shelving, then called for backup. Claire and I stood in the hallway, watching the pieces of our lives ripped open. Whatever they were about to find, it would change everything again. Behind the basement shelf, they found a recessed panel, reinforced with steel and painted to match the stone. When the officers pried it open, the air that escaped was cold and metallic, untouched by time. Inside was a steel suitcase, locked with a thumbprint scanner, modern tech hidden in an old house. The lead detective looked at us as if waiting for a confession, but we had none to give. That suitcase belonged to a man we never truly knew. Once opened, the suitcase revealed stacks of $100 bills, gold coins, and sealed black envelopes marked only with initials. It was the missing fortune hidden in plain sight. Not in banks but in shadows. The officers counted quickly, verifying every bundle, the gold glinting under flashlight beams. Claire stared at it like it might bite, her lips parted in disbelief. We weren't his heirs, we were his last audience. Inside the suitcase was one final envelope, sealed in red wax and marked with both our names. We opened it together, fingers trembling, half hoping it might offer closure. The note inside was short, too short, written in blocky handwriting. "Forgive me. I never meant to hurt you. I wanted to protect you both." Claire read it aloud, then stopped. Her face twisted, not in grief but confusion. It wasn't Daniel's handwriting. We knew it instantly, instinctively. It lacked the fluidity, the flourish, the control he always wrote with. Claire pulled one of the old letters from her coat pocket to compare, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't written by him," she said, voice tight with something new, fear. "If he didn't write that letter, then who did? And why sign his name?" The detectives had taken samples earlier, part of standard protocol. They were looking for confirmation of the baby's identity. Days later, the results came back. I expected another lie, another betrayal, but the truth was plain. The child was Daniel's biological son. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth, silent tears falling, her eyes locked on mine. For the first time, we both saw each other not as rivals, but as widows. Claire crumpled to the floor, the weight of truth too heavy to hold anymore. "He's gone," she whispered through broken sobs. "And I'll never know who he truly was." Her voice cracked again and again, the sound of a woman unraveling from the inside. "How do I raise his son?" she asked no one. When everything about him was a lie, I didn't have an answer. I only sat beside her, and for the first time I cried too. As the investigation widened, a new name emerged from Daniel's business records: Victor Lane, his longtime partner. Except Victor had vanished 2 weeks before the crash, just after their last known financial transaction. The police started tracing him through bank logs, travel footage, and one cryptic voicemail left on Daniel's phone. It simply said, "You think you're untouchable. You're wrong." Whatever had killed Daniel had started with Victor. They found him in Nevada, hiding in a motel under a false name, sick, disheveled, desperate. When confronted, Victor broke in minutes, the guilt rotting through his words. "I cut the brakes," he confessed, hands shaking. "He was going to turn me in. He got scared, started talking too much." Daniel hadn't died by chance. He'd been silenced. Claire nearly collapsed again when the news reached us. Victor Lane was taken away in cuffs, surrounded by cameras, his name flashing across every screen. He didn't fight it, didn't cry, just looked tired, as if the weight of Daniel's sins had crushed him too. I watched from behind the glass at the station, arms crossed, emotions deadened. Justice felt cold, impersonal, like a transaction instead of closure. He was guilty, yes, but it didn't bring Daniel back, or fix what he left behind. Within days, the press swarmed the house, circling like vultures over fresh tragedy. Headlines screamed of fraud, bigamy, murder, millions in stolen funds. Claire and I couldn't leave without being followed, questioned, dissected. They painted us as naive, complicit, or worse, the perfect tragic figures. But none of them knew the silence, the weight, the rot left behind in that house. Claire made her decision quietly on a rainy morning. "I can't raise my son here," she said, packing only what fit in her trunk. I helped her fold baby clothes, carry boxes, hold him one last time. She hugged me longer than I expected, tears soaking into my shoulder. "He'll never know this version of his father," she whispered. "And that's the greatest gift I can give him." After she left, the house felt different, emptier, not just in space but in spirit. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of light felt like Daniel watching, waiting. I walked the halls alone, each step echoing louder than it should have. Shadows clung to the corners like cobwebs of memory, and even the silence seemed to grieve. I stayed one more night. I needed to. That night, I sat at Daniel's old desk, running my fingers along its worn edges, searching for anything left unsaid. My thumb caught on a tiny seam beneath the drawer, a hidden groove. I pulled gently, and a shallow panel slid open, revealing a small velvet-lined box with my name carved inside. No lock, no key, just a box that had waited in silence. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single ring, not my wedding band, but a delicate gold circle set with a small ruby. The stone he once said reminded him of my laugh. Beneath it, a folded note in Daniel's handwriting. "You were the only one I truly loved." My throat closed, torn between fury and longing, love and devastation. It was too late for this to fix anything. But still, I held the ring and wept like it mattered. I walked out of the house just as the sky began to shift, pale light bleeding over the trees. The air felt lighter than it had in days. Not peaceful but released. I turned back only once, the keys heavy in my hand, and locked the door for the last time. Behind me stood a house full of answers I never asked for. Ahead was something better. A life that could finally begin. I sold the property quietly, gave half the money to Claire, and donated the rest in Daniel's name, not to honor him but to close the ledger. I changed my number, my address, my path. I stopped calling myself a widow because that meant I had once been a wife, and now I saw that I hadn't. I had been a placeholder in someone else's fiction. Now I would write my own. For weeks, I wrote a letter to Daniel every night, then tore it up before dawn. I wrote everything I wished I'd said, everything I never got to feel. I told him about the pain, the anger, the love that still refused to die, even when everything else had. Each night I ended it the same: "You could have told me. I would have stayed." And each morning I knew I was lying. One evening, months later, I received a photo on my phone. Claire and the baby, both smiling, standing in front of a small sunlit house. "We're okay," her message said. "He laughs like his father, but his heart is clean." I stared at it for a long time, then saved it without replying. She had her own beginning now, and I had mine. Sometimes I still dream of the house, but not the real one. In the dream, it's filled with music and laughter. Daniel alive, no secrets, no lies. I wake up crying, but I don't hate the dream. It's the version of him that never existed, but once made me feel safe. I let myself have it just for a moment. Then I opened my eyes and let him go again. Daniel Carter didn't die in that crash, not really. The man I loved, the man I trusted, the man I waited for all those nights, he never existed. What died was the illusion, the performance, the beautiful lie he built for two women who gave him everything. The truth is heavier than the lie, but it's cleaner. And in the end, it set me free.